everyone. Welcome to Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel, and today we are continuing our deep dive series in part 7 of reading from the Bermuda Triangle by Charles Berlitz. So today we're continuing chapter 6, and there's about 20 pages left. We're going to reread from the top of page 98, and we will go from there. There's not too many pictures in this chapter, so that's just the way it'll go today. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're also enjoying this new background here. Okay. Chapter 6, page 98. Let's continue. Besides constant official denials, an obvious disadvantage to planned UFO research is the general nervous levity provoked by information media as they make reports to the public concerning UFO sightings. When reports of UFOs increased immeasurably in October 1973, being sighted in Louisiana, Ohio, Mississippi, Minnesota, Georgia, and Florida, and witnesses included such presumably level-headed persons as the governor of Minnesota and numerous police officers and state troopers. Sufficient public interest was generated to warrant frequent reports by the press and networks. In this instance, CBS Radio offered its listeners a fairly detailed report of the sightings, but delivered it in rhyme. Another report informed the public that the Detroit police force had established a procedure for dealing with the occupants of UFOs when and if they should be taken into custody, even providing separation of sexes in the case of male and female captives, always providing that earthly biological differences may be in effect among the hundreds of millions of potentially inhabited planets. So we did read this already, but we're just rereading it so that we can get familiar again. It's been a week. The persistence of UFO reports and official non-recognition often elicits believers' feelings similar to those expressed by E. J. Ruppelt, R-U-P-P-E-L-T, who headed an Air Force investigation of UFOs in his book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. What constitutes proof? Does a UFO have to land at the river entrance to the Pentagon, near the chiefs of staff offices, or is it a proof when a ground radar station detects a UFO, sends a jet to intercept it, the jet pilot sees it and locks on with his radar, only to have the UFO streak away at phenomenal speed? Is it proof when a jet pilot fires at a UFO and sticks to his story even under threat of court-martial? Reports of UFOs in the southern Florida Bahamas area have been and continue to be numerous out of all proportion to sightings elsewhere. They have been seen under the clear waters as well as in the skies, and going from the sky to the sea and from the sea to the sky by numerous reliable observers. The number of locations of sightings have given rise to theories that the presence of UFOs has something to do with the disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle, or rather, to be more explicit, that UFOs have been hijacking planes and ships for generations. One of the most expressive supporters of the above theory is John Spencer, author of Limbo of the Lost. Spencer is familiar with aircraft, being a flyer himself and an Air Force veteran of 10 years service, and he is also a student of UFO phenomenon and a member of NICAP, National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena, a serious research organization for the study of UFOs, which includes among its members top echelon United States government, Navy, and rocket personnel. Spencer became interested in the Bermuda Triangle, which he prefers to call the limbo of the lost. During the time of the disappearance of the U.S. atomic submarine Scorpion, which many people connected at the time with other losses in the Bermuda Triangle. The loss of the Scorpion did not remain a mystery, however, as it was finally located over 400 miles from the Azores, partially through, in Spencer's opinion, previous Russian tracking obligingly made available to the U.S. Navy. He continued, nevertheless, to study the disappearance area and, projecting reported losses on a chart, concluded that almost all of them occurred on the continental shelf from Cape May, New Jersey, to the end of Florida and beyond, continuing east to the Gulf of Mexico and southwest to the Antilles, including a 450-mile circumference of Bermuda and the whole Bahama Banks. Spencer, who has studied the problem of the disappearances for many years, feels that the only believable explanation for the disappearance of planes and ships, complete with their crews and passengers, is that they have been and are being physically carried off from the seas or skies where they were traveling. He observes, since the complete disappearance of 575-foot vessels in calm seas 50 miles offshore or commercial airliners going in for a landing cannot happen according to earthly standards, and yet are happening, I am forced to conclude that they are being taken away from our planet. Examination of details reported sightings of UFOs, not only in our own times, but throughout recorded history, have led him to believe that there exist two main types. One would be the ubiquitous flying saucer of about 80-foot circumference, and the other, a tremendous mothership able to carry a dozen or more saucers in its interior. Or perhaps large specimen vessels from Earth. This gigantic spacecraft carrier would correspond to the sometimes reported huge oblong or cylinder-shaped, occasionally referred to as cigar-shaped, objects sighted at various times, but not so often as the flying saucers. Spencer thinks that the reason so many strikes are made in the Limbo Triangle is that the opportunities for taking human specimens there are more numerous, as in general the presumed raiders seem to avoid land operations and contact with human beings. The area is crowded with travelers by sea and air, and it is easy for them, the alien entities, to get in and out. The functional power of the UFOs may be, in his opinion, based on a sophisticated use of radio frequency as a propellant, which, in turn, would explain the electronic drain noted in most of the incidents. Holy moly. So I'm going to take a moment here to chat with all of you. But how about that so far? Use of radio frequency as a propellant. Forget gasoline. You have radio waves. Spencer's theory of why space kidnapping on such a scale would occur is an intriguing one, and is shared by several other investigators who seem to have arrived at it independently of one another, pointing out that among the staggering number of planets in the other solar systems within our galaxy, there are approximately 10 to the 21st stars. 10 to the 21st stars. Each presumably with its own solar system. Yeah. Well, the verdict's still out on that one. The law of averages presupposes the existence of highly developed civilizations. He suggests the possibility that the populations of other planets in the past have blown themselves up through misuse of energy and become flaming suns, leaving no vestige whatsoever of their history, populations, or scientific and cultural development. Therefore, the visitors from other worlds may possibly either be interested in preserving a living relic of Earth on some other planet, or may wish to check the advancement of our present civilization on the Earth before misuse of nuclear power becomes a danger to other planets. Or they may have other motives of which we cannot possibly conceive. Perhaps these alien intelligences are even willing to let us go our own way while they observe us, but are taking specimens they will preserve as an example of Earth life as it was before the planet destroyed itself, which, in the case of other planets, they were perhaps not able to accomplish in time. Examination of the many reports of what may have been UFOs before the age of the airplane gives one the impression that Earth has long been under observation from other worlds and other civilizations. However, throughout history, man has looked to the heavens for signs and portents, and almost always found them. It is sometimes difficult to differentiate between actual UFOs, if they so were, and the many fiery portents from the heavens to be variously interpreted as warnings, encouragements, or prophecies. An excerpt from the Annals of Thutmose III, an Egyptian pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, identified in the Egyptian Museum in the Vatican, may be the earliest written record of UFOs seen in antiquity. Contrary to some of the visionary accounts of later centuries, it describes the unusual apparition with commendable repertorial detachment. And here is that account. In the year 22, the third month of winter, the 6th hour of the day, the scribes of the House of Life noted that a circle of fire was coming from the sky. Its body was 1 rod long and 1 rod wide. They laid themselves on their bellies, then went to Pharaoh to report it. His Majesty was meditating on what was happening then. These things became more numerous in the sky than before. They shone more brightly than the shining sun and extended to the limits of the 4 supports of heaven. The army of Pharaoh looked on, with him in their midst. It was after the evening meal that these fire circles ascended higher into the sky to the south. Pharaoh caused incense to be burned to re-establish peace in the land and ordered what had happened to be written in the annals of the House of Life so that it be remembered forever. One notes that the Pharaoh maintained his aplomb under stress, befitting a god, as he was considered and perhaps even considered himself, although somewhat mystified by this manifestation from other superior gods. The Gilgamesh epic of ancient Babylon, probably inherited from the preceding civilization of Sumeria, describes the hero Etana's, Etana, being taken aloft by the gods over the earth until he is so far away from it that to him the sea looked like a water trough, and the land looked like porridge, more or less what he would have seen had he had been observing the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and nearby lands from a great or orbital height. The fiery visitation seen by Ezekiel, quote, "The whirlwind out of the north, a fire enfolding itself out of the mist, thereof came 4 living creatures," end quote, has frequently been cited as a UFO, one that landed and subsequently took Ezekiel aboard as a passenger. This heavenly vision, or perhaps spaceship, took place in the 7th century BC, and it is subject to much of the book of Ezekiel in the Bible. It has recently been the subject of investigation in an unusual German book, Da Tat sich der Himmel auf, The Heavens Were Opened, and recently published in English as The Spaceships of Ezekiel. It was written by Joseph Blumrich, Blumrich, a rocket engineer and designer, now on duty with NASA in Huntsville, Alabama. Dr. Blumrich began his book with the intention of debunking the sometimes expressed theory that Ezekiel's vision was actually a spacecraft. As he researched his subject, however, and noted that Ezekiel's detailed references to the apparition he had seen made perfect sense if the, quote, wheels within wheels were applied to helicopter power, which would enable the main rocket vehicle to hover over the land, and that the usual phenomena of rocket landing and takeoff were clearly and matter-of-factly described by Ezekiel, both to the changing colors according to speed, the blast of wind, the landing gear, and even the asbestos-resembling dress of the occupant. Dr. Blumrich then reversed his standpoint. He thereupon wrote a book diametrically opposed to the one he had started, establishing through biblical reference not only that Ezekiel had repeatedly seen a spacecraft, but also that the being described by Ezekiel as the Lord was simply the captain of the rocket. Ezekiel's narrative is but one of a long series of historical reports of what may have been UFOs of antiquity and the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and the early modern times. The different ways that viewers have described them through the centuries are fanciful, varied, and often amusing. But their very vanity may furnish a thread of corroborative reporting when we consider that those who saw them described them with the vocabulary which came most naturally to their bemused minds. We may suppose that Ezekiel, for example, used terms like lion, ox, and eagle to describe features of the rocket, and likened what may have been part of the landing gear to a calf's foot. A rather apt description, since he, belonging to a pastoral economy, was familiar with these domestic and wild animals. Alexander the Great and his army, being for their part eminently familiar with warfare, likened to, quote, great shining silvery shields, end quote, an apparent UFO foray of 329 BC, which interfered with the passage of the Greek army as it was advancing over the Jaxartes River into India, and that's spelt Jaxartes. Aristotle, born 384 BC and died 322 BC, being familiar with the thrown discus of the Greek athletes, qualified the objects he saw in the sky as heavenly discs. The more bellicose Romans saw them, like Alexander, as shields or fiery darts or fleets of ships. Pliny, in Volume 2 of his Natural History, 100 BC, wrote, quote, in the consulship of Lucius Valerius and Gaius Valerius, a burning shield scattering sparks ran across the sky at sunset from east to west, end quote. The Hawaiians describe the objects they have been seeing for a reported 1,000 years as, quote, akuateli. Akuateli, yeah. So this is spelled Akuatele, or, as it's known to them, flying spirits. In the religious Middle Ages in Europe, the moving objects seen in the night skies seemed to be crosses. Could the history-changing cross seen by Constantine have been one of these? And sometimes, as in Ezekiel, they were described as burning and revolving wheels. In the age of discovery and exploration, the heavenly travelers assumed to the eyes of the viewers, the likeness of ships, and still later, after balloons had been invented, the flying objects were described in France as, quote, shining, fiery balloons, end quote. In 19th century Vermont, the weaving-oriented observers called what they saw, quote, an aerial spindle, end quote. While observers from each successive period tended to name the moving objects in the sky by names which they came most readily to their lips in moments of stress, it remained for our own culture to call them at first flying saucers or cigar-shaped objects. As a matter of interest, at the time of the two-day mass sightings in the United States in 1947, first over Iowa and then over Mount Rainier in Washington, the UFOs were first called discs and subsequently pie pans before being called saucers. Frank Edwards, a longtime observer of unexplained phenomena, thinks that the tremendous blast in Siberia on June 30th, 1908, in a deserted area along the Yenisei River near Lake Baikal, only reindeer were victims. Although long considered to be the result of a meteorite striking the Earth, was really an atomic blast caused by the explosion of a spaceship. And I'm going to spell these rivers and lakes out for you. So Yenisei, Yenisei, and then Lake Baikal is Baikal. He cites the Roman science writer Alexander Katsenev, Katzenev, as stating that the damage under recent investigation is identical to that produced by man-made atomic blasts under similar conditions, with lingering radioactivity and fusing of metals. No meteoric fragments, although, of course, they might be much deeper within the Earth, have been recovered. Edwards concludes, quote, "In the catastrophe along the Yenisei River in 1908, we lost a guest from the universe." End quote. M.K. Jessup, a writer on UFOs of considerable scientific and disciplinary preparation, being an astronomer and a specialized selenographer, an expert on the moon, was of the opinion that the book The Case for the UFOs, that his opinion was that the famous ship disappearances or mysteries within the Bermuda Triangle, including the Freya, Freya, the Mary Celeste, the Ellen Austin, and many others were caused by UFO activity. He goes farther afield than the Triangle, describing the differences of the entire crew from the Seabird, a large sailing vessel who vanished after hailing a fishing vessel near their home port of Newport, Rhode Island in 1850, with a log entry made 2 miles from port and with a prepared and undisturbed meal on the mess table. The Seabird apparently continued without crew on her homeward way and beached herself high on the beach, quote, "as if lifted by giant hands," end quote. And then, although firmly stuck in the sand, vanished at night in a storm. From examination of these ship incidents, Jessup concluded that such disappearances were, quote, "almost impossible to explain except as upward, something operating from above with great and decisive power and suddenness of action," end quote. His comments on a suggestion of, quote, "selective ruthlessness, something of evasion or secretiveness," end quote, adding, quote, "all are attributes of intelligence," end quote. Jessup was of the opinion that the development of our air age, quote, "is of great interest to our space neighbors," end quote, and that this may be the explanation of the increasing number of UFO sightings in recent years, concentrated to a notable extent in the Bermuda Triangle area off the coast of Florida and around Cape Kennedy. On one occasion at Cape Kennedy on January 10th, 1964, a UFO was reported to have zipped into the tracking range during the firing of a Polaris missile, and for 14 minutes the radar followed the erratic course of the UFO before getting back on the target missile. Though widely commented on by those present at the time, this report did not appear in the press, possibly because mysteries are not conducive to public confidence. Jessup's theory of UFO interest in our air age, which has since his death in 1959 escalated into the space age, has been considerably strengthened by quite recent developments. UFOs have been observed during some of the space shots, notably Gemini 4 and 7. In Gemini 4, astronauts McDivitt and Borman observed a bogey progressing parallel with their craft and thought for a time that it might be necessary to take evasive action. Another bogey was reported as having followed Gemini 7. The Apollo 12 moon flight was, for a time, at 132,000 miles out in space, escorted by UFOs, one in front and one following. Their presence solicited from astronaut Gordon the observation that they were, quote, very bright and seemed to be flashing at us, end quote. And later, in communication with the Houston Command Center, he said, quote, we'll assume it's friendly anyway, end quote. Although there has since been no confirmation from the Houston Command Center or from NASA, these lights were also noted by observatories in Europe. Still later, on the same flight, another bright light described by the astronauts as being, quote, as big as Venus, was visible by astronauts between them and the Earth for about 10 minutes and then disappeared. While taking into account that UFOs may be anything unidentified, including parts of booster rockets and other debris in space, the activities of such UFOs, as well as their capacity for appearing and disappearing, seem to indicate an independent and non-orbital direction. Concerning sightings of alleged UFOs in spaceflight by astronauts, Dr. Franklin Roach has observed in the Condon report that the, quote, conditions under which the astronauts made their observations are similar to those which would be encountered by one or two persons in the front seat of a small car having no side or rear windows and a partially covered, very smudged windshield, end quote. An observation which, carried to its logical conclusion, would infer that nothing the astronauts might note through visual observation could be truly credited. As has been the case with several other investigators of UFOs and happenings within the Triangle, Jessup became convinced that a covert censorship was smothering many important reports and developments. His last book before his death was about biblical reports of, quote, flying saucers, end quote. And he was also preoccupied with the question of how controlled magnetism could produce invisibility. An outgrowth of Einstein's, quote, unified field theory, end quote, which Jessup considered the key to both to the sudden disappearance and disappearance of UFOs and the disappearance of ships and planes. He was in Miami when he met his death on April 29th, 1959. According to Dr. Manson Valentine, a longtime friend and one of the last persons who ever talked with him, Jessup was in a depressed state of mind. Dr. Valentine had invited him to dinner on the evening of April 20th. Jessup accepted the invitation but never arrived. He died in his parked station wagon in Dade County Park of carbon monoxide poisoning, the exhaust pipe having been connected by a hose to the interior of the car. Damn. Probably because of Jessup's insistence on certain aspects of intervention in the affairs of this world from other worlds, there are those who consider that Jessup's death was not self-induced, and that the incident is an indication of the dangers of too close research in this field. So a setup to look like suicide. Dr. Manson Valentine, a zoologist, archaeologist, and oceanographer, has studied for several decades the unusual happenings in the Bermuda Triangle, from the Triangle itself, Miami and the Bahamas, and the other islands. As in situ, IN space SITU, investigator. So I guess that's a type of investigator. As an in situ investigator, he is an excellent source for ascertaining what has happened there in the past, as well as what is happening now. Much of the information he has at his disposal, especially that which he recalls from the last conversations with Jessup, is so startling that it should be reported in Dr. Valentine's own words as expressed in the answers to the following questions. Question: how long have you been involved in observing the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon? His answer: for more than 28 years since the disappearance of the PBMs in 1945, I have collected data on disappearances, interviewed survivors of incidents, and kept notes of reports of UFOs in the area at the times of the disappearances. Question: is there a notable increase of UFO sightings in the area at the present time? Answer: there are more sightings in this area than at any other place. There have been many recent sightings of aircraft that we know are not planes, and undersea craft that we know are not regular submarines. A recent sighting of this latter variety was made by Captain Dan Delmonico in April 1973. He is a lifelong sailor and a calm observer of excellent reputation. He made 2 almost identical sightings of an unidentifiable object under the very clear water of the Gulf Stream, both in approximately the same area, about 1/3 of the distance in navigation between Great Isaac Light, north of Bimini, and Miami, where the Gulf Stream waters are very deep. Both sightings were made at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, with smooth seas and normal ground swell and excellent visibility. In the case of both sightings, a gray-white object, smooth and shaped, as he said, quote, like a fat cigar with rounded ends, end quote, rushed past the bow of his boat underwater. Delmonico estimated the size of the object to be 150 to 200 feet long, and its speed to be at least 60 to 70 miles per hour. When Delmonico suddenly caught sight of the underwater moving object, it appeared to be on a collision course with his boat and seemed to be getting ready to break surface just in front of him. Apparently sensing his presence, the object dived and vanished after passing directly under his craft. There was no turbulence and no visible wake. There are no elevators, fins, or any other projections to interrupt the smooth surface, and no portholes. UFOs in the sky have been seen so often in the Triangle by pilots of aircraft and crews of ships that they have become fairly commonplace, especially over the tongue of the ocean. What is more intriguing is the presence of hovering UFOs seen by strangers as well as by myself over the treetops in the Okefenokee Swamp. And that's spelled Okefenokee. In Central Florida, I saw one with a blue beam pointing at the waters of a lake. Perhaps they were taking on water or even samples of local fauna for study. Yeah, I think some of these craft siphon water up. I've heard other accounts like that. At the time of the April 1973 blackout in northern Florida, blue-green lights and blue trailing lights were seen in the sky, especially at Turkey Point, where the atomic reactor is. In the Great Blackout incident of the eastern seaboard, some years back, a flight of about a dozen UFOs had been seen. Question: do you have a theory on how UFOs are powered? Answer: there are several possible theories. One method useful only in our atmosphere, would be the possibility of a disc-shaped ship having a perimeter of cathode ray generators which could rapidly travel in any direction simply by operating the generators on the lead edge or side of desired motion. So basically like this. Like you just move around just by tilting. Then the generators would ionize the air in front of the vehicle, thus causing a vacuum into which the craft could move. Pockets of ionized air left by UFOs quite possibly could be a cause of the clear air turbulence experienced by pilots. So these things, these white waters in the Gulf, these guys are saying that they could be these crafts, and if they're magnetically invisible, that's why you just see the streaks in the water, the white streaks. Like, you know how when you see a boat going in the sea, you see the wake, the white wake? Well, that's what these are, like wakes that all of these people are seeing in the water in the Gulf. They're calling it white water because they don't see anything else around them or in front of it. Another method of propulsion would be similar to jet propulsion, but infinitely faster and theoretically approaching the speed of light. The power reactors would concern atomic fusion rather than atomic fission. All that is required is fusionable material and the water. This could account for UFOs being seen lifting water from inbound lakes. So that explains that, huh? Alright, so next, we have some sketches here. I'll finish this question up because he's still answering it here. Still another theory involves the change of dimension and time warp based on special electromagnetic fields. We're getting to exactly where I wanted to get in this book. The change of dimension and time warp based on special electromagnetic fields. Okay, so now we have actually three sketches, but two descriptions. So the first two sketches here, it says, sketches of 2 of the 14 UFOs sighted by Dr. Valentine. The sighting on the left was made at midnight, August 21st, 1963, near Ashton, south of Orlando, Florida. The object was apparently taking on water from a lake. The distance from the observer was estimated at about 75 yards. The UFO on the right was sighted above trees at the roadside on U.S. Route 441, a few miles south of Pearson, Georgia, at the edge of Okefenokee Swamp at 3 a.m. It appeared to be luminescent and was pulsating with a bluish light. Distance from the observer, approximately 100 feet. Okay, these are great. So let's get the triangle image off here for a second. Okay, so the first image on the left is the one cited by Dr. Valentine, and it is of the water being siphoned off from the lake. Sorry that it's not adjusting here. Let's see if we can get a little more light on this. There we go. That's a little better. Sorry. And then the one on the right side was witnessed from 100 feet away, and it was emitting blue light. Okay. We got one more sketch here. The description says UFO observed by Dr. Valentine at 2 a.m. on December 6th, 1952 between Douglas and Fargo, Georgia. In Dr. Valentine's opinion, the dark core tunnel-like vortex shows what may be a stream of neutron emission, indicating atomic fusion rather than a fission reaction, a possible non-polluting method of converting atoms into power. Such fusion would build up a magnetic field which would power the UFO at incredible speeds and possibly bring into the same field other moving objects in the immediate vicinity. So we have here this third sighting. All right, and there's still more questions and answers in this little interview here. So we will continue that now. I kind of like it squared and squared like this, because then you get to see a little bit more of me here. Okay, continuing on. Did Dr. Jessup think there was a connection between the UFOs and the Bermuda Triangle? So this is the question from the interviewer. Answer. He had a theory that the power of magnetic fields could transform and transport matter from one dimension to another. That UFOs could come into our dimension and get out again, taking human or other samples with them. He further thought that some of the accidents were caused by the UFOs' cathode rays, creating a vacuum which disintegrated planes when they entered this field. This is probably what happened to Mantell. Note, on January 7th, 1948, Captain Thomas Mantell and several other pilots at Godman Field, Fort Knox, took their P-51 Mustangs up after a UFO, quote, of tremendous size, end quote, observed during daytime and approaching the base. When Mantell climbed after it, his plane was seen by witnesses to disintegrate. A later Air Force statement declared that the captain, quote, blacked out while pursuing the planet Venus, and that the plane fell apart in the subsequent dive, end quote. Yeah, right. He flew too close to the saucer into the saucer's field of ionization. Yeah, you see that? There's the official report, and then there's like what actually happened. What this guy is saying, like, no, like that's the official report, but this is what really happened. He flew too close to the saucer into the saucer's field of ionization. His plane exploded into so many pieces that nothing larger than the size of a fist was found. All pieces located were perforated as if little worms had bored through them. So that's like it melted, like it got to an extreme temperature and then just started, or all the metal crumpled because it got so hot, and then it started even making little worm wiggles out of it. And another thing is, if it did get caught in that field, then whatever energy the unidentified craft was giving off could have melded together with whatever the plane was made out of, and that's what caused what they describe as little wiggling worms on here. Not wiggling, but like just sticking out as such. As if little worms had bored through them. Oh, so that's more like a blast. It's like a blast out. This may have happened as well to the constellation that Bob Brush, a commercial plane captain, saw explode near Great Inagua in the Bahamas, and this is spelled Inagua, back in October 1971. Bob was flying a DC-6 and got the constellation on radar, flying low and possibly in trouble. Suddenly it exploded with a flare that lit the sky from the horizon to horizon. The explosion was so brilliant that it hurt the eyes. Absolutely unusual. A boat near the scene picked up a flight manual that Bob later examined, and it was riddled with small holes, just like the bits of wreckage from Mantell's plane. The UFOs, whatever they are, seem to create a temporary magnetic vortex, an ionization pattern that can cause ships and planes to disintegrate or disappear. Jessup, before he died, believed that he was on the verge of discovering the scientific basis for whatever was happening, which he considered explainable according to Einstein's, quote, unified field theory, end quote. Question: can you give a piece of simplified explanation of the unified field theory? And his answer: the basis of it is that all our compartmentalized concepts of time, space, and matter-energy are not separate entities but are transmutable under the same conditions of electromagnetic disturbance. I'm going to read that one more time for you guys. The basis of the unified field theory is that all of our compartmentalized concepts of time, space, and matter-energy are not separate entities, but are transmutable under the same conditions of electromagnetic disturbance. So time and space are not separate and can be manipulated through electromagnetic disturbance. Actually, so continuing on here, his answer. Actually, the unified field theory offers yet another explanation of how UFOs could materialize and disappear so suddenly. In practice, it concerns electric and magnetic fields as follows. An electric field created in a coil induces a magnetic field at right angles to the first. Each of these fields represents one plane of space. But since there are 3 planes of space, there must be a third field, perhaps a gravitational one. By hooking up electromagnetic generators so as to produce a magnetic pulse, it might be possible to produce this third field through the principle of resonance. Jessup told me that he thought that the U.S. Navy had inadvertently stumbled upon this in a wartime experiment carried out on a destroyer, which has been called the Philadelphia Experiment. And we will be talking about the Philadelphia Experiment in much more greater detail here on this channel. So that might actually be its own deep dive later. Or we might just talk about it in full here as a sub-chapter. But yeah, I'd like to talk about that a lot more. So, next question. What was the Philadelphia Experiment? Answer: according to Jessup, the Philadelphia Experiment was a secret experiment conducted by the U.S. Navy in 1943 at Philadelphia and at sea. Its purpose was to test out the effect of a strong magnetic field on a manned surface craft. This was to be accomplished by means of magnetic generators, degauzers. Both pulsating and non-pulsating generators were operated to create a tremendous magnetic field on and around a docked vessel. The results were as astonishing as they were important, although with unfortunate after effects on the crew. When the experiment first began to take effect, a hazy green light became evident, something like the reports we have seen from survivors of the incidents in the Triangle who tell of a luminous greenish mist. Soon the whole ship was full of this green haze, and the craft, together with its personnel, began disappearing from sight of those on deck until only its waterline was visible. The destroyer was subsequently reported to have appeared and disappeared at Norfolk, Virginia, which may have been the result of a trial invisibility run involving a related time warp phenomenon. It was reported by a former crew member that the experiment was successful at sea, with an effective field of invisibility of spheroid shape extending 100 yards from each beam, which showed the depression made by the ship in the water, but not the ship itself. As the force field intensified, some crew members began disappearing and had to be rediscovered by tactical contact and restored to visibility by a sort of laying on of hands technique. Certain others became so far removed from their original material dimensions that they could only be detected and brought back to normalcy by a specially designed electronic device. For such cases, when a shipmate could neither be seen nor felt, the crew had a quaint expression, being, quote, stuck in molasses, end quote. Actually, it was a state of suspended animation from which full recovery could be a serious problem. It was rumored that many were hospitalized, some died, others were adversely affected mentally. Yeah. Psychic ability seemed to have been generally sharpened, while many retained the effects of transmutation from the experiment, temporarily disappearing and reappearing either at home, walking on the street, or sitting in bars and restaurants, to the consternation of onlookers and waitresses. Twice the ship's binnacle suddenly burst into flames while being taken ashore, with disastrous results to the carrier. Am I reading this right? Are they saying that they started disappearing and reappearing after the event in their daily lives? On the street, in the bar, at home, walking on the street, restaurants? Yeah, it says, while many retained the effects of transmutation from the experiment. So these people were phasing in and out of reality well after the event happened. I didn't know about that. All right, next question. Did Jessup witness these incidents? And again, this is Dr. Mason Valentine answering these questions. Answer: I don't know how much he personally witnessed of the things he told me, but he researched it pretty thoroughly. You must remember that he was not a, quote, crank, end quote, writer, but a distinguished and famous scientist and astronomer. He had been in charge of the largest refracting telescope in the southern hemisphere, directed several eclipse projects, and was the discoverer of double stars, and had a brilliant scientific record. The reason that he became involved with the Philadelphia experiment was that a man who claimed to have been a survivor of the experiment, named Carlos Allende, or Carl Allen, wrote to Jessup in 1956 about his book, The Case for UFOs, because of the similarity of basic theory. Allende started a correspondence with Jessup, who naturally answered like any author answering fan mail. Sometime after this correspondence began, Jessup was requested to come to Washington by the ONR, Office of the Office of Naval Research, Remember that censorship had covered up the Philadelphia experiment except for one brief article in a Philadelphia newspaper. So this stuff wasn't reported on at all. One newspaper article about this event. Jessup was shown a hand-annotated copy of his book, which had mysteriously appeared in the Office of Naval Research with voluminous annotations referring to his theories, the experiment, and UFO activity. Alrighty, I gotta take a note here to get Jessup's book, and we will have that for one of the later times here. I hope you're all doing well out there. We're almost done with this chapter. I'm thinking of trying to finish it, but we'll see what happens. So we got Jepson, or Jessup. So, yeah, we'll be looking into this other book here eventually. Continuing on. Jessup was asked if he recognized the handwriting, apparently written by 3 different people, each of whom had identified the separate entries with his initials. He thought he recognized one script and the accompanying signature of those of Allende and submitted Allende's letters to the ONR. The Department of the Navy subsequently ordered to be reproduced by an outfit in Texas, I think, 25 exact copies of the marked up book with the notes printed in red. Jessup, who received 3 copies, was told that this was for the top echelon circulation within the department. The Navy never officially admitted anything about the experiment, but they certainly were interested in the book. Jessup also told me that the Navy had tried to track down Allende from the return address on his correspondence, but had failed. Nor were there other commentators who had written on Jessup's book ever identified. Question: why did Jessup kill himself? Hey Jason, I see you there. Dr. Valentine's answer: if he committed suicide, it was probably due to extreme depression. He had been approached by the Navy to continue working on the Philadelphia experiment or other similar projects, but had declined. He was worried about its dangerous ramifications. He was also despondent over the criticism directed against his books by the scientific and academic world. Question: you said if he committed suicide. Is there any reason to believe that he was killed? Dr. Valentine's answer: there were some comments, some people who have thought so. Perhaps he could have been saved. He was still alive when he was found. Perhaps he was allowed to die. His theories were very advanced, and perhaps there were people or influences that wished to prevent their spread. It is curious that Jessup's own edition of the annotated Navy book, as well as a copy he had given to Bryant Reeves, another writer on UFOs, disappeared from the mail when they were sent to other people. Question: do you agree with Jessup's theories? Dr. Valentine's answer: in general, yes. The whole question of magnetism is still largely a mystery. If we develop Einstein's implications in his unified field theory, which brought gravitational electromagnetic fields within the theory of space-time, magnetic fields, if strong enough, would be able to cause objects and people effectively to change dimensions, thereby becoming invisible. But what about the consciousness? Is he assuming I would stay here? The answer to the question of the Bermuda Triangle may perhaps be found in electromagnetic aberrations or controls that are evident only at certain times, when they are activated either by chance or by design, and it seems plausible that the presence of UFOs could create the necessary energy changes. Question: why do you think there is such a concentration of incidents in the triangle? Dr. Valentine's answer: I believe it is possible that the intelligent beings which direct the UFOs are not only taking samples, checking out our scientific progress as evidenced by their interest in Cape Kennedy and our space probes, but are returning to what may have been the location of ancient sacred sites, perhaps energy centers or power stations that are now covered by the sea, like the Florida Keys, which we will get into much later. We have in recent years discovered near Bimini and other places in the Bahamas great building complexes on the sea bottom, an indication that a high state of civilization existed here many thousands of years ago. Wow, you hear that? We have in recent years discovered near Bimini and other places in the Bahamas great building complexes on the sea bottom, an indication that a high state of civilization existed here many thousands of years ago. And the Florida Keys are the same way, by the way. It is more than curious that so many incidents happen in this area and so many UFOs are seen not only in the sky, but entering and leaving the ocean. And by the way, I would like to thank Zenray, who is a watcher of this channel. He directed me over to Dutch Sense, which I used to watch a long time ago, but he linked me this video of Dutch Sense talking about the Florida Keys. He was going through Google Earth and showing all of the submerged structures that he found down there and measured and how they all angled in on each other, and he came to a consensus that it was probably an ancient city that's in the Florida Keys. And now, here in this book today, we are reading that it's not only the Florida Keys, but it's also in the Bahamas and near Bimini, where great building complexes are on the sea bottom. Alright, so we're going to continue on. We're almost finished here with this chapter. So, it is more than curious that so many incidents happen in this area, and so many UFOs are seen not only in the sky, but entering and leaving the ocean. Question: what can we do about UFOs and their implied menace? Dr. Valentine's answer: there's really nothing we can do about it at the present time. I don't think there is much danger to most travelers, and perhaps the people who have disappeared may be still alive in another place or dimension. I think, however, that it is important to recognize the situation and try to enter into some form of communication with them. That is what many of us are trying to do. In light of what they obviously could do, we should consider ourselves fortunate that their activities have been so far largely benevolent, although there is always the possibility that these visitors do not come from the same places in outer or inner space, and do not share the same possibly, quote, conservationist, end quote, views about our planet and its inhabitants. If spacecraft either willfully or inadvertently are responsible for our major blackouts, it is a remarkable fact that not a single incident involving personal injury has been attributed to power shortage during these periods. And that's the end of the question and answer portion. It is to be noted that both the Great Power Blackout in the Northeast in 1965 and the Miami power failure of 1973 were followed by local reports of UFOs. During the Northeast blackout, sightings of a red shining ball 100 feet in diameter were made in Syracuse by observers who included the Deputy Commissioner of the Federal Aviation Agency. Other UFOs were sighted over New York, Newark, and Philadelphia, and numerous places in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New York State. A curious side effect, the malfunction of automobile motors in the vicinity of reported UFOs has a strong bearing on the electrical drain and radio failure associated with their presence and reported by so many pilots of planes and ships in the Bermuda Triangle area. It is evident, however, that many individuals prejudicing the blackout situation in favor of the explanation that the presence of UFOs creates disturbances in the Earth's magnetic field, and the electric communications and installations were more on the lookout for celestial visitors at these specific times, especially since there were no interfering lights and the opportunity for examining the heavens was at an optimum. In all events, while the site of the circuit breaker which caused the Great Blackout of 1965 has been indicated, the Sir Adam Beck No. 2 on the Niagara River. The initial cause has not been explained, as an assessment made after the investigation is still essentially true. Quote, the blackout caused by the failure of the Northeast power grid created one of the biggest mysteries in the history of modern civilization. And we don't hear about this at all. Yes, Zenray, I watched that whole thing that you sent me. It was about like 48 minutes long or so. Well, it was really good, though. I really appreciate that. And we might actually look at some clips of what he was pointing out here, because it's really like the bottom tip of Florida has a whole bunch of submerged geometric shapes. What's up with that? It makes no sense. The only thing is that it was past civilization. Just got submerged. Great to see you both here. And I know a few others of you are here too. I don't see you, but I do know you're watching, so thank you. So let's continue here. Several of the most persistent observers of the Bermuda Triangle agree that if there is no earthly explanation for the disappearance of so many craft, then the explanation may well be an unearthly one. Removal of ships, planes, and people through the agency of UFOs. In addition, the majority of UFO sightings are reported as lights of different colors and intensity, noted at night, and some of the spectacular plane disappearances have been characterized by unusual lights reported in the night sky. This happened at the time of the Flight 19 incident and again in the case of the Star Ariel. However, although there is some agreement regarding UFOs and plane and ship disappearances, there is no agreement about where these UFOs may be coming from. Somewhere in outer space, with its billions of possibly inhabited planets, would seem to be a plausible source of visits, except that travel time, calculated in light years, would take a good part of a lifetime, or many lifetimes. The trip to the very nearest star, our own sun, would take only 18 minutes by light time, although the next nearest star, Alpha Centauri, is 4.3 light years away. So 8 minutes versus 4.3 years. But perhaps the length of a lifetime as we know it would be considerably different from that known on the planets of distant stars. Besides, new theories have arisen in recent years concerning the limit of speed, the limit of light, the curvature of space, and the relation of time to mass and energy, which may eventually modify our concept of time necessary for travel to other galaxies. Some theorists suggest that the source of the visits may be nearer Earth, perhaps from the oceans of Earth itself. Ivan Sanderson, in his book Invisible Residents, pointing out that nearly 3/4 of the Earth lies underwater, 170 million square miles of water to 60 million square miles of land, and the fact that the air breathers living on the land bottom of the... The air breathers living on the land bottom of the air ocean live fairly close to the surface of the Earth. The air ocean, I've never heard that. While other While water breathers, not limited to staying on the bottom of the hydrosphere, have a tremendously larger cubic volume in which to operate and develop, suggests the possibility that there is an underwater civilization or civilizations on this planet that has been here for a very long time and which was evolved here, and or that there are intelligent entities who have been coming here from elsewhere, which prefer to use the bottom of the hydrosphere, and possibly also the surface layers of the lithosphere below that, on or in which to reside and from which to operate. He observes that if such a civilization developed underwater, it might be considerably further advanced than the surface civilization developed by the forms of life that left the sea for the land so many billions of years ago, inasmuch as remaining in the sea would have had a head start in its original environment and continued to develop throughout the ages, while concerning itself very little with events on dry land. Breakaway water people. That's what they're saying, right? The presence of such developed entities and technological activities. I'll reread that. The presence of such developed entities and technological activities under the seas of the world may have given rise to the many sea legends recorded throughout history and even today, when unusual occurrences are noted and recorded with infinitely more precision than the previous times. This would explain the air-to-sea UFOs seen in the Bermuda Triangle, as well as the particular UFO interest in technological developments in Florida and over the adjacent waters. As for discovering the truth about their existence, it may be a question of not so much of us discovering them as they're discovering us and seeing in us a source of danger to their own environment. Then there's the suggestion that that UFOs fly in from another dimension and spirit planes, ships, and people out of ours. Or take away planes, ships, and people. The theory of other coexistent dimensions, which touches on the theory of negative matter, a negative Earth, and coexistent worlds, is somewhat less fanciful now than when it was first proposed several decades ago. A famous explorer and aviator, Admiral Richard Byrd, who undertook flights over the intensified magnetic fields of both the North and South Poles, made an incredible broadcast in 1929 while on a flight over the South Pole. He told of emerging through a foggy light into an area of a green land with ice-free lakes and reported seeing huge bison-like beasts and other animals and what looked like primitive men. The broadcast immediately went off the air, and Admiral Byrd's report was attributed to temporary nervous exhaustion, or hallucination. Both the exploit and report were subsequently unpublicized, quote unquote. Although the fact that Byrd had made the broadcast did his reputation little good in scientific circles. Strangely enough, a number of persons who were frequent moviegoers in the 20s are sure that they remember seeing newsreels of the Byrd flight, together with views of, quote, the land beyond the pole, end quote. Although it is possible that, having read about the incident, they had confused other newsreels showing the Admiral's exploits with the controversial one. The incident itself has been regulated to the world of legend, and it is hardly ever referred to except by believers in the Hollow Earth cult, who assume that the Admiral had flown into a hole in the Hollow Earth rather than through a hole into another dimension, as has been suggested to explain disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle. I only chuckle at this because they have Hollow Earth in quotes and then cult next to it, because they're, I don't know. In any event, there would seem to be a similarity between the magnetic force fields, such as those allegedly created by the Philadelphia experiment, and the conditions over the poles themselves, always assuming that Admiral Byrd's overflight of the pole was made in circumstances when he was in complete command of his facility. Considering the wide choice of unusual explanations held by many serious and well-qualified investigators of the Bermuda Triangle incidents, one is somehow reminded of Haldane's epigram, quote, "The universe is not only queerer than we imagine, it is queerer than we can imagine," end quote. Among the various reasons for the chain of unexplained disappearances we have just considered, we have the selective capture of human beings by outer or inner space entities, a dimensional hole in the sky which planes can enter but not leave, or what has been termed, quote, "a magnetic tear in the curtain of time," end quote, and magnetic whirlpools, which cause craft to disappear or perhaps move into another dimension. These theories are neither more or less fantastic than still another theory that predicates the existence within the triangle of great power complexes, ancient machines, or power sources from a previous civilization, lying on the ocean floor within the area of the triangle, and which, even now, may be occasionally triggered by overflying planes, creating magnetic vortices and causing magnetic and electromagnetic malfunction. The overflying planes would therefore, in a sense, at certain times and under certain conditions, unconsciously trigger their own destruction. But while this theory is perhaps the most unbelievable to our accepted norms, of all those suggested in this and other chapters, certain natural and unnatural features of the area in question and the area's geological history infer a connecting thread linking through several of the above theories. To consider this new theory, we must go back in time. Time in the life of the ocean and the civilization of man. And that's the end of chapter 6. So now we have yet another fascinating concept here. Is that the area of the Bermuda Triangle could be the location of an ancient power source, such as a generator that is now offline, and it goes online when boats and planes or other magnetic anomalies, heavy anomalies, giant mass anomalies, whenever they pass by it, they start acting it up, and then that's what takes them away, and who knows what that generator actually is, if that's what it is. Because now we're considering not only, see, we talked about ley lines, that, and I think it was on Tuesday's show for the Coral Castle. Like, there's grid ley lines all across the land here, but it's in like hexagonal shapes. Like my backdrop. If you look at this backdrop, we have lines that kind of connect each other all around the world like this, and there's very prominent like buildings and locations along these lines all around the world. So that's all an ongoing thing. I'm developing this consensus here that the ley lines could be man-made, and I never thought about that before. But then also this triangle area may have something like an ancient power plant that can be activated partially, and it's to our speculation, right? Like, we're just trying to figure out what all this is. But that's the end of chapter 6. And next we have chapter 7, a suggestion from the oceans past. And that we will begin next week. And that will be only 14 pages. It's not bad. Today was 20 pages. But that's it. I'm calling it for today. I hope you all had a great time. If you haven't subscribed or liked the channel yet, please do. I am really fighting all this shadow banning. So if you can, please engage with the video and share it around, do whatever you want. Go back and watch other stuff. But this will be the end of part 7 for chapter 6, and we completed chapter 6 today. Wow, I did not think we'd get into the Bermuda Triangle or the Philadelphia experiment while talking about the Bermuda Triangle. I didn't think that would happen today. But I'm glad that we got a formal introduction to the Philadelphia experiment. There was a feature film made about that. And I do have the DVD in my collection here, and I have watched that film. I suggest everyone to go seek that out and watch it. It gives a very good visual presentation of what happened to that crew when their vessel moved in space and time. So that'll be all for today. Next show will be on Saturday. Also, if you've missed my other lives, you can either check them out in the live tab or wait until midnights. I will be having rebroadcasts as premieres to the main channel, since a lot of you are not getting notifications. But I'm doing my best to do all this other cross posting, and I think doing the text posts on YouTube and duplicating that onto Substack, that's going to be my plan going forward. So you'll have links to come to this channel on YouTube and see everything. Find the playlist that you'd like to see, because I'm just trying to organize this as much as possible. But I'm glad that we touched the Philadelphia experiment today, because I want to get into that more as the months go on here. And that may very well be its own deep dive, the Philadelphia experiment. So that's it, everyone. Saturday, be here, 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. We'll be doing part 4 of the Chicago film industry deep dive. We're getting through the early turn of the century, and we're getting into part 2 of Flickering Empire, which is, let's see real quick. It's called Chicago Rising. Oh yeah, Colonel William Seelig. So we're going to be talking about filmmakers on Saturday. All right. And soon we'll be doing movie reviews. I'm considering doing watch-alongs. If that's something you'd like to do, that'd have to be something off of YouTube, something I would have to put on Patreon. But yeah, I'm considering this. I'm considering this for maybe my top 10 films where we can do watch-alongs. But I also want to do deep dives into those films themselves. And that includes The Matrix. So, until the next one, class dismissed.